And greetings. I hope you all can hear me. If anyone has joined, feel free to weigh in. The reason for this video is I took keen offense to something Dr. Dan accused me of, that I didn't do this, that my math was wrong, in a peer-reviewed reference chapter that I published with 3 distinguished co-authors. I promised him, however, that I would review the matter, and I've concluded that I was quite right. And his colleague Grauer, I'm quite convinced is the buffoon I thought he was. I am quite convinced of this because that reference chapter, the section that I wrote, was not based on Grauer's math. And even by Dr. Dan's admission, he blew it once. I think maybe he's blown it again. And I frankly don't care, because my math was not based on Grauer's math. And I said that repeatedly to Dr. Dan. This was based on the Poisson distribution, and he insisted I was wrong because I didn't cite Grauer. I didn't have to. And I'm going to cite the papers that I used. I'm going to settle. I promised I'd settle it. I'd look into the matter. And he was astonished I wasn't looking at Grauer's nonsense. And I apologized. I said, look, that's a fair criticism. I ought to look at the nonsense Grauer writes, because there's a cloud hanging on over my work. And the work, unfortunately, the cloud unfortunately hangs over that of my colleagues. And that's not fair to me. That's not fair to them. So I want to settle this quickly. He made a big deal about this on his channel, about Sal being, accepting, what creationists ought to do better. And so I think that was the right thing to challenge me on. And I think I'm going to be equal to that challenge today. He accused me of not citing Grauer. And I told him, I said, the guy, I think the guy's an idiot. And that impression is not diminished very much. Grauer was infamous in like 2013 for saying, if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. And then he went on a tirade accusing huge numbers of scientists, hundreds, of being crooks, ignoramuses. Even the director of the NIH is a creationist, and the head of the ENCODE project is being the scientific equivalent of Saddam Hussein. And I think a more circumspect scientist would have said, hey, look, there's a lot we don't know, and just let them, if their science is bad, it'll self-correct. Instead, he goes on, calls them crooks, ignoramuses, lambasts them. Grauer's labeled a vigilante, and people started being a little bit more mooted just because he had led such a hostile crusade against them. And the reason I think he's a real buffoon is that was, 11 years ago? Just look at all the experimental work on the various things that he insisted had to be junk. It's hilarious. We have Royal Society papers showing that there's zDNA conformations in the ALU elements, and it's really complex. It involves the ADAR enzyme also modifying the RNA transcripts, and even other biologists said this is like zeros and ones in a computer, and I totally saw that. We're starting to learn a little bit more about the role of introns, which is a large part of what he considers junk DNA. Introns are very complex in the roles. It's very hard also, by the way, to sequence RNAs because they don't last long. However, I have attended ENCODE conferences. All the researchers there, for one, and this gotta hurt, not a one mentioned Grauer's name. He's like nothing to them, nothing. He was just a nuisance, a pest, just a heckler. But there are hundreds of scientists from way more prestigious universities than the one he teaches at. Stanford, Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, UC San Diego, Johns Hopkins, you get Yale, you get the picture, not to mention NIH. And it was something that the director of the NIH Francis Collins was very interested in. About $1 billion by my estimates. If you look at maybe 20, 30 years of ENCODE research, that also includes the roadmap epigenomic projects, mouse ENCODE, psych-ENCODE, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, at a rate of about 50 million a year, it's gonna add up to a lot of money over 30 years. Okay, it's gonna add up to a lot of money over 30 years. And here he's railing on this project, just insulting all these scientists, hundreds of them, probably not at this point thousands, because there's so many laboratories exploring what he's calling junk. He's calling them crooks and ignoramuses. I mean, I've seen stuff with link RNAs and just like, thank God they didn't listen to Grauer. So, I mean, that's why my opinion of him is that low. And reading his paper and the supposed correction, that only reinforced it. That's why I thought it was unfair that Dan was insisting, well, you didn't cite his paper. I didn't have to. Dan said I didn't cite it. Dr. Dan said I didn't cite his paper. I did cite one of his archive papers just because he said, there are going to be 82 mutations per human per generation. I didn't think that was some deep calculation, and I'll show why it shouldn't have to be. And even if that number was wrong, it doesn't change the math that I called the Bonkers equation. It doesn't change the math. I can't believe Dr. Dan is faulting me for not citing the math of some numbskull when I could cite Kimura, when I could cite Poisson. There's no reason, and I'm going to show how Dr. Dan just made his life way more complicated than it needed to be. And you're going to see that derivation here. So, to accuse me that my math was wrong in a peer-reviewed publication where I had 3 other co-authors, I got to defend this. And I'm going to show that, even though I kind of stuttered and stumbled because Dr. Dan came after me, I'm just like, what's going on? You had a year to contest the math. I mean, have you been listening to Zach Hancock, who just makes stuff up and says, I don't understand what I'm talking about? And Zach came on my channel and I tried to set him straight. I said, dude, you're saying I don't understand this stuff. I wrote it. I wrote this stuff 3 years ago, and then I published on it. So, sorry I'm a little exercised here, but I think I need to stand up and get things straight. Because yes, when I'm not confident about something, I stutter. I look a little bit nervous. That's, because I'm a very careful thinking person. I was thinking, yeah, Dr. Dan, let me look at this. And see what this is about. But once I look into it and I'm confident I'm right, you get another Sal. And that's what you're going to get today. That being said, this is still a good exercise. I appreciated his criticism, his willingness to criticize me. I appreciated that it came on the table. And I'm appreciative of the opportunity to really vindicate how good some of my stuff is. Relative to evolutionary biology, this is an opportunity to show what good science is and contrast it with some of the garbage that I see out there. So I welcome that opportunity. So that being said, I'm kind of breathing fire right now, but why don't I play the clip that is in question? Now, the audio may not be that good. That's just so this will play a little better. Otherwise, StreamYard will freeze. Defect in the functionality, those numbers actually hold. That's where you get, and it's backed up by the papers when you look at the equations that I put there, where you take the Poisson distribution, it agrees with Nachman and Kroll. When you have 3 mutations, you need 40 females. It exactly agrees with the formula I put there. And then also Walker-Keatley. And then just extrapolating it out, it came out to the one that Dan Grauer came out. So
did you?
This is a simple of math derivation, and I've done the derivation right.
Right, but it's wrong. The math is wrong. Did you cite the 2020 paper in the book chapter?
I don't have to. The Poisson distribution is accepted all the way back to Kimura.
Yeah, but you didn't cite.
I don't know why that's in dispute.
You didn't cite the revised math that everybody agrees is correct. You didn't cite that in the chapter, and I know you didn't cite it because I read the chapter and reviewed the chapter, and I checked, and it wasn't there.
Okay,
you didn't cite the updated paper even to say. You didn't cite the updated paper even to say that it was wrong, and here's why.
Okay, so I tell you what, I mean, the fair way to settle this, okay, is that I will look, you sent that to me, and I have to tell you I didn't read it because I was quite confident my calculations were correct. Okay, maybe that's arrogant on my part, but I'm just like, this is a Poisson distribution. This is so fundamental to our understanding. If you want to undo all of the evolutionary biology that relies on the Poisson distribution, because I did the derivation on my channel. So in fairness to settle this, I will, if you can kindly send that. I think it's only right that I review it and read it, and because I value your criticism. And if you want to come after me on that, I think that's fair.
To be fair, I have brought this paper up to you before, including the second time we talked about genetic entropy on MDD way back in the day.
Yeah, I'm confessing I totally disregarded it because I had this is how little I have regard for Dan Grauer, anything he said.
But the thing is, the whole point, see, you should have liked this paper then, because the whole point is that Grauer was wrong. That's the whole point of the paper.
All right, sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. First off, it's our paper. It's our reference chapter, me and 3 other co-authors. We don't have to cite anyone we don't want to. And if we think someone's a buffoon, like I think Grauer is, why the heck do I have to cite him? Why do I have to cite his math? There's only one thing I cited from him. It was a archive paper where he gave a mutation rate, and he said, this is bonkers. But I didn't use his mathematical equations. In fact, when I read his updated paper, I'm just like, gosh, the guy's a buffoon. And you'll see why. So there's nothing for me to apologize for not citing his lousy math. Because I'm going to build this up from the Poisson distribution in Kimura. And by the way, Kimura, I think, has a lot more seniority than Dan Grauer. So let's just, I'm going to just, for the uninitiated to see what this is all about. I'm going to just painfully walk through this. Dr. Dan, if you're watching, I'm sorry that some of this is review, but I'm just going to try to be thorough because I'm going to use some terms that, in my presentation, in my explanation that, oops, sorry. I'm going to use some terms that I might refer to, and, just to make sure that I'm not introducing terms that some of the viewers might not be familiar with. I'm going to go through all of it. So you can't fault me for not, you can't fault me because I decided not to cite a buffoon. And that's what I think. Grauer is a buffoon. So you're insisting that my math is wrong because I didn't cite a buffoon? I think people should see that my math was right, and it's a good thing I didn't cite a buffoon. I cited Kimura, I cited Poisson, I cited Walker-Keatley, I cited Mueller, I cited Nachman and Kroll as authoritative. The only little thing, I'll show you the little thing I cited. He said 82 mutations per generation per individual. And oh, thank you, Godzilla Freak. Yes. Don't think I've ever seen that many citations in a row on a YouTube stream. Yeah, you could tell I'm pretty incensed about this, because 2 or 3 times in that exchange, I was trying to explain something and Dr. Dan says, but it's wrong, but it's wrong. And he looked really confident about it. And I said, that kind of set me aback. I said, I'm very circumspect on matters of this difficulty. And I said, let me look into it. But now that I've looked into it, and it's like, I'm even more emphatic. That Grauer is a buffoon. It's not just because I think his math sucks. It's because he's railing against hundreds, probably thousands of scientists that are studying stuff he thinks is garbage DNA. And he's being overruled by practically the entire scientific community, except evolutionary biologists. And this has been a funny fight, where you saw him leading the charge of evolutionary biologists against the rest of the scientific establishment. It was hilarious. He was calling them creationists. He's calling them crooks. He's calling them ignoramuses. Just like he would treat creationists, he was treating fellow scientists who are a lot more senior than he is, if I may say so. A lot more senior than he is, including Francis Collins. So, in my list of citations, okay, so I told Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal, that I did this derivation on my YouTube channel. I did it December 14th, 2020. That's almost 4 years ago. It's been hanging out there. And he had plenty of time to say, hey, the way you did that Poisson distribution wasn't quite right. And in that video, I cited Kimura. I cited Kimura and Maruyama, Eyerwalker Keatley, Nachman Kroll, Herman Muller, who was a Nobel Prize winner, by the way. I cited its reference to Ono in the whole junk DNA controversy. So maybe he missed it. And hey, that's okay, Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal. But guys, it's not like this hasn't been out there. And then Zach Hancock says, I don't understand this stuff. This stuff has been out there for 4 years. So maybe Zach Hancock missed it. And, I take exception to him saying, I don't understand this stuff. So what I will point out, though, is there's some really bad stuff in evolutionary biology. Toward the end, I'll show where the math fails. Yes, we do have 2 Dr. Dans. Dan Stern Cardinal is my friend, and Dan Grauer. Okay, so I'll just say Grauer when I mean that other guy. So I'm not doing this in presentation mode so I could see this a little more clearly. Let me see if I could shrink this a little more. Okay, I'm going to also remove my laundry room. Okay. Muller's limit and the U paradox. Implications in Muller's 1950 landmark paper are loaded mutations. Now, the math was not as detailed in that paper as it was with Kimura. But let's just go on. So this was the only paper that I cited, and it wasn't his math that I was citing. I was just taking a number where he said, suppose we had 82 mutations per individual per generation. That's pretty much it. I was just taking a number, and I said that in my exchange with Dr. Stern Cardinal. I said, I just took the number. I didn't use his math. Maybe that he didn't hear me say that, but that's all I used. So you can't say that the math was wrong. Maybe the number that was input was wrong, but I mean, we'll go over that, okay? But if you say hypothetically there are going to be 82 mutations per individual, you pump that through the equation, you get another number. We don't actually know. Let me just point this out. We don't know how many mutations there are per individual per generation on average. So we use hypothetical numbers. All I did was use a hypothetical number, the same one that Dr. Grauer's using in one of his examples. And he has tables of hypothetical numbers. Hypothetical, they're not proven. Hypothetical numbers. You could just, okay, so all I used was a hypothetical number he was using for a hypothetical example. But my math was correct. So let's continue here. The reason I cited this is he used the word bonkers. I just thought that was cute. Here it is. All right, there's just a claim here. It says, if 80% of the genome is functional as trumpeted by ENCODE project consortium, then 45 to 82 deleterious mutations arise per generation for the human population to maintain its current population size. Under these conditions, each of which us should have on average between 3 to 10 to the 19th to 5 to 10 to the 35th. This is clearly bonkers. Now, there was a slight discrepancy in that number, and I'm going to try to resolve that. It was, if you use 82.2, I get exactly the same result. If you use 82.2, okay? So, but then he said if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. Whatever he meant by that, the way he went about, just going after, when he started to go after distinguished scientists, including Francis Collins, calling Collins the creationist. I mean, that's like the ultimate insult in like the biological community, to call someone a creationist, and calling them crooks and ignoramuses. I mean, so whatever he meant by if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. The way he went after the ENCODE scientist tells you probably what he really meant. Right? He was saying evolution's right, therefore ENCODE's wrong, and therefore anyone who's trumpeting the ENCODE project and some of its claims is a crook and ignoramus. And he was saying that these guys are just running up the bill, trying to make money. I mean, that's why I just don't take the guy seriously. Except that he provides nice quotes like, if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. Because sometimes the obvious is rather painful and hard to ignore. Because if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. And that's me saying it, okay? If you don't like me quoting Grauer, I'll quote myself. If ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. And I'll say, go further and say, I think ENCODE's right. And evolution is wrong. So there. If you don't like me quoting Grauer, I'll quote myself. So this whole ENCODE thing, okay. So on his Tumblr channel, he was saying ignoramuses, crooks, scientific equivalent of Saddam Hussein. He's referring to Ewan Birney, the founder of ENCODE. This has led to fights even inside universities. Joe Felsenstein is at University of Washington, and so is John Stamatoyiannopoulos. He's an ENCODE researcher, and Joe Felsenstein, respected population geneticist, thinks Stamatoyiannopoulos is wrong, and they disagree. So the battle lines have been drawn, but ENCODE is huge. There are all these follow-on projects. I mean, this is okay. I wrote this 4 years ago. I have no idea how much bigger this has gotten. This roadmap epigenomics project was like a $300 million research project. So why is it just FYI? Why is it so expensive? They have to send stuff off to laboratories to do all sorts of experiments to see how the epigenome works. And there are like 1 trillion cells in humans. they categorize them into roughly 300 cell types. And there's no way you're going to capture every cell. We hope we can get some cells from various tissues of interest that they want to study, for whatever variety of reasons, especially cancer and other heritable diseases. I mean, heritable in the sense, tendencies, etc., people that are at risk. So this is really a big project. There's a lot of money, a lot of reputations are at stake. So I'm just setting this up, So you said if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. He's fighting a very big establishment. This is why it's kind of comical. Here's an evolutionary biologist whining because the data doesn't agree with his views. That's just the irony. Okay, so there's also the 4D nucleome. Oh my goodness, that's another one. There's also the E4 epitranscriptome project, which is very interesting. That's modifications of the RNA. Around a few years later, Dr. Sanford and I helped prepare this slide, and we are talking about Grauer's numbers, and he used the word bonkers. So, and we cited this number of about 80 mutations per individual per human. And again, these are just hypothetical numbers. We didn't, concoct them from math. We're just, like we have an equation and you have an XY plot. You plot all this variety of X values. But if ENCODE is right, and given what little we know about, how many mutations per human, we can make some guesses. Okay? We're still a lot in the dark, but generally it has bothered a certain segment of the evolutionary biology community to say that the human genome is highly functional. It's philosophically repugnant to them because the idea that there is a designer who designed things exquisitely, that's kind of offensive there. Plus there is some math, which I'll walk through. And so that was cited. Dr. Sanford, he has sympathizers in the National Institutes of Health, which is probably the biggest biological enterprise in one organization, like 30,000 staff and researchers, kind of in around the Rockville area of Maryland. Bethesda is gigantic, and he got invited by certain of his fans, much to the disconcert of the directors and others, but Dr. Sanford availed himself very well. I helped him specifically with this, and I'll go into those numbers. So, and it's what I call the Bonkers equation. The Bonkers equation is here, okay? So the idea of this Bonkers equation, there's an average number of mutations, bad mutations, that happen, that the next generation has that the previous didn't. So if the next generation adds on average one mutation per individual per generation, okay? So if all the kids have at least one mutation that their parents didn't have, that means that to have one kid that doesn't have that mutation, because all the siblings are different. So some siblings are sickly, some siblings are perfectly healthy. And even with, on average, one mutation per generation per individual, what that would mean is you'd have about 5 kids that are sick and maybe one that's healthy. So kind of random, random mixing, because remember, even if you have 2 parents that have heritable diseases, you still might get a healthy kid. Just the random draw. So it's very possible then that these parents are generating bad mutations, but because of what they call recombination, whether you get one piece of your dad or one piece of your mom, you might get a healthy allele or whatever you want to call it. And so just working out the odds. So if the average is one mutation per individual per generation, that means you might have some poor kid that's born with 3, some with 5, and then maybe with none, it averages out to 1 mutation per individual per generation. I know that was long-winded, but that's what the Bonkers equation predicts. How many kids, how many offspring are required by mom to have so that you'll have at least a pair of kids that don't have, that don't inherit that defect? Now, if the average number of defects, let me just call them defects. If the average number of defects is up to 3, you need, according to the Bonkers equation, each female needs to bear 40 offspring to have two offspring that are healthy on average. Again, these are all averages based on the Poisson distribution. That's all it is. Now, if you take Dan Grauer's number of 82, he threw out a hypothetical number of 82. That's all I did. I took his hypothetical, made it my hypothetical, pumped it in the equation, and you get an order of 10 to the 35th. It's not exactly 10 to the 35th. Okay, there's some room for movement, but I said, look, these numbers are so absurdly astronomical. Does it really matter? I mean, okay, look, even 10 slight birth defects, the female has to have 44,000 offspring just to have 2 kids on average that don't have a birth defect. I mean, does it really matter once you start to get up to these numbers? But at issue, he said my math was wrong. I'm going to prove to you that I didn't need Dan Grauer to come up with this equation because I had someone infinitely more senior, infinitely more knowledgeable, whose math is pretty good, and that was Motu Kimura. Very respected even by creationists. So I'm going to go through that. And I told Dr. Dan, I said, I didn't need Grauer's stuff. So first off, how has Kimura been cited? So unfortunately, I didn't include in this presentation the title of the paper, and I feel really bad about that, but let me try to find it for you just for completeness. It is high. Let me see if I can get it. There it is. High genomic deleterious mutation rates in hominids. And this was way back in I think this is like 1993. Nature, January 1999. You'll see that's old. Look, the Poisson distribution's been around for a long time. Just because, the fact that it is used, it's relied upon, and then we just elaborate on it, it just tells you it's considered a good staple. So I should have put this and said, the title is High Genomic Deleterious Rates in Hominids. So let me just put that there so you know where I got it. I'll save that for later. High genomic deleterious rates in hominids. And you'll see that I highlighted, I'm sorry, let me make this bigger. You'll see that I highlighted this 1 minus e to the minus u. You're going to see that term a lot, and I'll explain what that means. But they specifically cite Kimura and Maruyama, 1966. 1 minus e to the minus u. And u is the number of slight birth defects per individual per generation. And all you have to do is take whatever number you think u should be and plug it into this equation. And I'm sorry it's a little bit smallish, but let me try to make it bigger so you could see it. 1 minus e to the minus u. So if you plug in the number 3 and you put it into the Bonkers equation here, okay, you plug in the number 3 for u, you'll find out you need 40 offspring per female. That's all it is. So hypothetically, whatever number of slight birth defects on average there is per individual per generation, You just put it in there. What that number should be, there is a variety of opinions on what number is the accurate number, but the equation is correct. So I didn't need Grar to teach me, what that equation should be, because first off, at least see it in Walker-Keatley, 1999. And then I also see it in this 2000 paper by Michael Nachman and Susan Kroll. And there you have it again, 1 minus e to the minus u. Wait, I'm sorry. Okay, I still think that's Walker-Keatley, but let me see. I'm going to fast forward. I apologize here. Let me get this right. Man, I have a lot of slides. Okay, this is Nachman and Kroll. 1 minus e to the minus u. U equals 3. It agreed. You need 40 offspring for 2 to survive and maintain the population constant size. And then Walker-Keatley, I may have interchanged the names there. Walker-Keatley also cites, u is greater than 1, much greater than 1, and you see that 1 minus e minus u. So this earlier citation, I apologize, I should have put it here. This is Walker-Keatley, and then the other one with the 40 children. This one's Nachman and Kroll. So I misattributed. This is Nachman and Kroll. Let me just correct that. Apologies. I was getting so excited here. Yes, so you can Google, there it is. That's the title of the paper, and that's the thing of interest. Okay, so now Walker-Keatley, let's see. Okay, that's the title, and you see this 1 minus e minus u. And I'll explain what that means. And they cite Muller, they cite Kimura, just like I said. This goes all the way back to Muller, and it goes back to Kimura, and really technically it goes all the way back to Poisson, who was a long time ago. So there is something called the mutation, the diploid mutation rate, and that's a term that Walker and Keatley used. But basically, and then Ono, who came up with the phrase junk DNA, he is referencing this number that Muller came up. The overall deleteriation rate becomes 1.0. 1.0 is the one mutation per individual per generation. And he said, well, if it's higher than that, then we won't be able to tolerate that mutation rate. And therefore, most of the genome has to be junk. Otherwise, evolution's false, which it is. But, he saw the stakes of this. Okay, so this is Kimura and Maruyama. And I'm going to show here, okay, there's this formula in this paper right here, equation 1.4. And it says right here, Poisson distribution. So this equation is the Poisson distribution. That's all I needed. July 1966, I didn't need Grauer. Okay, but I'll show you how it does connect to Grauer. And Grauer, he's like taking a brick to his head. He could have used something. I'll show you how simple this is. Okay, the simple equation is, as I said, you don't need the nonsense he was using. And in fact, I'll show you why this is even better, because the definition of fitness is just totally messed up. in evolutionary biology. I'm not the only one to say that. I mean, they may say it more politely than I would. That would include Ariot and Lewontin and Andreas Wagner. But all you need, if you take the Poisson distribution, you get that. You don't need all this fitness math. Now, that being said, Kimura did go through a lot of trouble, but let's highlight Kimura's paper. And I'm sorry I have to go through this, but I want to be at least marginally rigorous. So again, I just showed Kimura's paper, and then here's the Poisson distribution. So let's just review this. In modern population genetic literature, you'll see the Poisson distribution represented this way. And I'll explain what the symbols mean. In the population genetics papers, and also the wiki population genetic, it uses this. The symbols are different, but it's the same distribution. And for people, I know I'm going to blast through this because I'm going to bore people. But for those inspecting my work, you can pause and look for yourself. Every slide you can pause and look for yourself. So I'm just going to walk through this and show what symbols are the same. So in one equation, it's an I, and in the population genetic version, kind of the modern version, it's an I. In the older stuff, it's a K, but it's the same thing. In one, it's a U, the other, it's lambda. And then e to the minus u versus e to the minus lambda. It's the same thing. Instead of u to the I, you have lambda to the k. It's the same thing. So I corresponds to lambda. It's the same. They're just using different symbols. As Shakespeare said, a rose is a rose by any other name. And so you have I factorial versus k factorial. It's the same thing. Now, for those who are not math savvy, I'm sorry to be boring you, but I have to defend my math here because Dr. Dan at least twice, probably 3 times, said my math was wrong. And I take exception to that. He said, because I didn't cite Grauer. I was like, I don't have to. Look, it's right here. This is the Poisson distribution. And I'm going to show why you don't need all that nonsense with fitness even involved, although Kimura tied it to fitness. But you can actually talk about genetic deterioration without reference to fitness. The only people that want fitness in their conception or that insist on it are evolutionary biologists by and large. So then I'm just connecting this to the older paper by Kimura and Maruyama and just showing the symbols are different. Okay. So there you go. So why is this important? So I'm going to go back and just conceptually say, okay, let's say, Darwin said natural selection is always removing the bad. The problem, and I'll show you why that's false. So if we only had a few members of the population that had a birth defect, we could clean up the population through natural selection, here represented by the Terminator. He says, hasta la vista, baby. And he's going to get rid of those with birth defects. I mean, I know this is cruel, but this is Darwinism, okay? Survivors, so the fittest survive, parents on to the next generation. They become parents to the next generation. And you can repeat the process. And supposedly this will preserve the species and actually give opportunity for improvement. But there's a scenario Darwin didn't account for. And that is a condition where everyone's sick. What are you going to do then? Right? You can't eliminate everyone. The Terminator can't eliminate everyone. So they came up with some ways to work around this. None of them work. The reason I can confidently say that now is that we have the experiments. We have numerous experiments and observations where the tendency toward reproductive efficiency leads to genetic deterioration. This is really bad because Darwin said, natural selection, it has like kind of like foresight, what's going to be good for the future, and it's going to keep accumulating. It's not going to be short-sighted and just dispose of things that are like half built, but that's what happens. And even things that are fully built but not immediately useful, like say a spare tire, it tosses it. Where there could be situations where it's really good to have a backup system. And that, by the way, the evolution of backup systems is a real big problem for evolutionary biology. It's not been quite well explored enough. But we do know from experiments and observations that creatures that have a lot of redundancy, ability to, one system fails, another system can take over. In an endosymbiotic environment and parasitic environment, these parasites start losing organs. It's like, hey, I really don't need a stomach because I'm feeding off the host. Oh, natural selection will just have you lose your stomach or other body parts. It's kind of gruesome, but that's how natural selection works. How does a process that overall destroys complexity, how's it going to build it? Because supposedly it took billions of years to build all that complexity. And there you go just in a different environment. We know this experimentally, in not too many generations, bam, the genes are gone, regulatory systems are gone, organs are gone. It just, the accounting doesn't look good. And then we have this situation where there's, if every, this is basically, this is where you get a situation, they may call it mutational meltdown. I'm not really big on names, but the situation where there's guaranteed genetic decay, because even in principle, even if the fittest survive, the fittest is still defective relative to its ancestors. So let's continue on. So that won't work. Now, there have been some proposed solutions called soft selection or synergistic epistasis. The experimental evidence has kind of put that to rest. In my prior rendition of this talk, I did cite Mueller. It's not as clear as Kimura's stuff. And we can talk about the meaning of what is functional and not. That's another talk. Godzilla Freak, by the way, it's so great to see you. It's weird that Grauer seems to actually understand genetic entropy much better than most. Yes, he does. He does. He's still a buffoon about it, but yes, he does. But just has a complete meltdown over it. And by the way, if you think I'm being too harsh, I have noticed not even his colleagues want to, be co-authors with him. He's just become so toxic. It's like, oh, I'm busy, Dr. Grauer. I don't think I could be a co-author with you on this. I mean, dude, look, Grauer went and insulted thousands of scientists who are just trying to cure cancer. I mean, you don't do junk like that just because your pet theory is getting run over by the evidence. It's just bad form, dude. Find another job. Anyway, so it's another discussion what constitutes true fitness, and that was in our Springer Nature reference paper. We had said that we would prefer, see if I have a picture of him, William Bielek. There has been in the community, okay, so just FYI, and then we'll move on. There has been, you have two sets of evolutionary biologists. You have Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett saying biology is so optimal. It's perfectly designed. But that was because of Darwinism. In fact, Daniel Dennett wrote a chapter in his book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea. Chapter 8, it says biology is engineering. And he's talking about the spectacular design that Darwinism would create. Of course, that's all been falsified in the last 10, 15, 20 years because of experiments and observations and theory. Same for Dawkins, but they'll say biology is well made. And then you have the set like Jerry Coyne, Nathan Lentz, and Francisco Ayala who'll say it's junk, Avise, and then oh no, and then Grauer, and then lots of, so yeah, you'll get a different story depending on which evolutionary biologist you talk to. But weigh in the physicists. Bielek is a Princeton professor, National Academy of Science. Brilliant. I have his book. It's a headache. I'm just like, oh my goodness. I have a master's in biology, a master's in physics. I was crawling through this book. It was so hard. I mean, oh my goodness, it was so hard. But in our Springer reference chapter, we cited Bielek. Life is more perfect than we imagined. There are aspects of biology that operate at the extreme limits of physics possible. And this has been noticed by physicists. So if we had to decide who's right, is biology by and large junky, or is it optimized and spectacularly so? It's looking like the biophysicists are agreeing with the creationists that this is very well designed. That being said, I'm sensitive to the fact that there's death, pain, and suffering in the world. So the creationists will say life is intelligently designed, but it's also cursed and in need of a savior. So the intelligent design proponents will say it's intelligently designed. Some will add that it's very optimal. But now even secular scientists, physicists especially, and I would also argue not just Bielek, but I suspect David Snow, definitely engineers like Stuart Burgess, and he really took it to Nathan Lentz, just kind of pounded Nathan Lentz into the ground. It was beautiful to watch. And Stuart Burgess is a NASA engine. European Space Agency engineer, also engineer for Olympic teams, and does all sorts of engineering. So I just wanted to say, eventually there has to come a definition what we really mean by optimality and fitness and all that, but it's not the evolutionary definition. It's a lousy definition, and that's also another show. So off to the Poisson distribution. So let's say we have an average number of mutations per individual per generation. And then, what fraction, let's say, we have some families that have, a few kids, and then others that have a bazillion. So the Poisson distribution goes out to infinity. And so what you see here is an approximation, because I used finite illustration. So if the average mutation rate is one mutation per generation per individual, what could you expect of the children? So 38.9% will have 0 mutations, which is good, a good fraction. But then another, 38.9 will have at least one mutation, one birth defect. You'll have 7.4 of the population that has 3 mutations, 11% that has 2. These numbers are not, I had to kind of fudge that because this goes out to infinity, but I just put in 1.9% just to round this out. So you could see here, all I do is apply the Poisson distribution, and I could see how many kids a female needs to have offspring that don't have a birth defect, or at least a new birth defect. Okay. This is all it is. I didn't need to use any particularly fancy math, but I'm going to go there I'm going to go the extra mile because Dr. Dan said I was wrong. He said it 3 times. And it's like, okay, look, I believe you think that. I believe he sincerely thought I made a mistake. And I respect that, he probably thought less of me because in his mind, I made a mistake. Of course, now today I'm thinking higher of myself, honestly. It's like, dang, Sal, sometimes you're really good, if I do say so myself. So obviously we went through this whole Poisson distribution. So let me just go through this a little more. Okay, for completeness, what do the symbols mean? This is how I calculate the probability. What proportion of individuals have no mutation, what proportion of individuals have 1. And that's where you put the number I in here. See, like that. You just pump this in there, and U is your mutation rate. And you can come up with these probabilities. So if you use this, okay, how did I get this? Okay, so if the first two numbers are pretty good, the approximation starts to falter here because this goes out to infinity. But how did I get these numbers? You know, how many have 0 mutations? How many have 1? You know, how many have 2? How many have 3, 4, and 5? All I did is just use this. This is how I arrived at that picture. That's all it is. I mean, I don't need Grauer to show me that. All right, now to, just a little bit of extra math, because you're going to see some things in the equations. If I use I equals 0, it's like, that corresponds to the number of, to the situation where there's no birth defect. The math starts to simplify, because you get 1 here and you get 1 in the denominator. So you just get e to the u. You'll see this a lot. You'll see e to the u, e to the minus u a lot. You're going to see that e to the minus u an awful lot right there. You're going to see that. So you see right here, e to the minus u. I'm just showing where some of this is coming from, okay? I didn't need Grauer to show me where, e to the minus u. So that's Nachman and Kroll. This is Walker and Cately. Oh yeah, here's the citation: high genomic deleterious mutation rates in hominids. So anyone wanting to inspect the math, this is where you get some of the numbers. I showed it right here. Okay. I mean, I painfully went from this paper to show you how I got the numbers here and how it fits into the literature. So far, I've done nothing wrong, and I needed absolutely not. I had no reason absolutely to cite Dan Grauer. I had no reason to cite Grauer. And Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal kept hammering it. Your math is wrong because you didn't cite Grauer. It's like, no, now that I realize I didn't have to cite that buffoon. My math was right because I didn't cite that buffoon, for starters. So now let's continue. And so, okay, so you see this equation, 1 minus e to the minus, 1 minus e to the minus u. That shows up, you're going to see that. You see it here, 1 minus e to the minus 10, and then you could, so where here you have 10 is u. Now there's some things off in the slide that could have been executed better, all right? But you're seeing where this came from. And this is in the October 18th, 2018 talk by Dr. John Sanford at the National Institutes of Health. I helped them prepare the slides, but there are some things we could have changed a little bit. But if I just take that, this is still the Bonkers equation. There is, okay, so you see E, okay. So if you have a mutation rate of 10 birth defects per individual per generation, you just put 10 there, and then you could figure out how many offspring you need. And I'll show you, I'll work through some numerical examples. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the significance of 1 minus e to the minus u. And I'm going to go and connect this to Grauer's like a circuitous kind of numbskull way of going about it. But, you have to fault Kimura a little bit for it because some of that math came from him, but I don't know why in the modern day Grauer had to use it. Okay, so, all right, this is pretty trivial, right? 1 equals 1 and 1 equals 1 plus 0. Okay, that's trivial. Now, this is a little bit more complex. Okay, if you have minus e to the minus u plus e to the minus u, that looks right. That's still equal to the whole right side of the equation here. All of this is still equal to 1. So that, for people who want to pause and check my math, they could see that. So, okay, I'm now going to put some parentheses. So what you see now, I'm going to highlight that in red. So in the literature of Eyerwalker, Keatley, Nachman, and Kroll, you see 1 minus e to the minus u. And then let me explain it. So this is a fraction. This is, okay, so if you're going to, okay, if you have 5% that live and 95% that are eliminated, so 5% plus 95% equals 100%. So this is just showing the fraction of the population that needs to be eliminated. So the fraction of the population is 95% if the number is 3, I believe, something like that. And 5% will not have to be eliminated. That's okay. Again, okay, I'm really spiking the ball here. I didn't need numbskull. I didn't need to cite numbskull Grauer to do any of this. Not one iota. And so to be criticized that my math was wrong because I didn't cite Grauer, it's like, no, Dr. Dan, I know you believe that, but here it is. Anyone can see I didn't need to cite Grauer to do this. This is like trivial. And I said on the show, and I couldn't believe you kept going after me. You said your math is wrong because you didn't cite. Just like, okay, maybe I was wrong. I did have a moment of self-doubt. Oh man, that was bad. But I like, I owe it to my audience to be thorough. And I said, what if Dr. Dan is right? This is bad. I got to check. I owe it to myself. I owe it to my co-authors. I owe it to my audience. And if I don't check, a cloud of doubt is now hovering because of what Dr. Dan said. Your math was wrong. Your math was wrong because you didn't cite Grauer. And I'm like, okay, I'll read the stuff that Dr. Cardinal sent. And I said, I owe it to the sake of truth. I need to set an example. That's the right thing to do. Because a cloud of doubt has come up. And I said, that's fair. Let's just settle it right. Rather than me just poo-pooing him, much as I am disgusted to have to read any of his stuff, I said, look, we'll settle this. So this is how and he did a whole show, Creationist, how to do better with Sal Cordova. So I'm trying to embody that. This is how to do better. So even if I don't like this process, I'm going to go through it because my co-authors were counting on me to do this right. And it sincerely bothered me. I got a little nervous. I said, did I let my buddies down? Did I let the people that were counting on me down? Did I make a mistake? I'm happy to say, no, I didn't. I was right. I was right. I was so right. I was so right. And you're going to see just how much more right I was. You're really going to see it. It's going to be impressive. You're going to see some L'Hopital's rule of indeterminate forms from calculus. I mean, you're going to see some, some okay math. It's not the highest level math I've done, but you'll see some. Okay, so now I've explained where you get this term, 1 minus e to the minus u. It's the fraction of people of the population that have to be eliminated, have to. That means selection has to operate at 100%, even for this to work. When we know selection doesn't do that because sometimes an accident happens and the good guy gets, struck by lightning, and the guys with the birth defects continue. And, nothing personal against someone who has a birth defect. I have plenty. I feel it with allergies and stuff, myopia. So, nothing personal against anyone with birth defects. Okay. I'm just trying to be an academic exercise here, but, selection doesn't work perfectly. And we know that. So this is like the most optimistic scenario. This is optimistic. All right. So now you know where 1 minus e to the minus u comes from. And again, I explained that. And now you can do a math manipulation. You can scale it to make the survivor a whole number rather than the proportion and multiply. So if you multiply both sides by e to the u, that's the number of offspring per parent. Number of offspring per parent. And that's actually easier to conceive of than fractions. I like integers. I don't like fractions. I mean, real numbers are beautiful, but integers are just beautiful. Beautifuler. Beautifuler. Oh, greetings, Ben Rex. Thank you for joining us. Hello. So, just to update you, maybe you've heard this. Dr. Dan said my math was wrong, and I'm defending myself. I felt he had some legitimate things to criticize, and I think they were sincere. But I don't think now in retrospect that I've examined it, my math was quite correct. And his criticism that I didn't use Grauer's math, he said I didn't cite him, and I'm saying I didn't need to, and I've just proven it here. There's no reason to cite that buffoon when I have people like Kimura and Poisson and Iwalker-Keatley and Nachman and Kroll and Mueller to cite. So I have to just say, I think I have vindicated myself. Thank you for looking into this. Ben Rex, thank you for being such a loyal member of the channel. So I'll continue here. So we could just say, using this, I like this formulation better because e to the use the total minimum of offspring, number of offspring per parent. It's much easier to state rather than fractions. So when we say the female needs to bear 40 children, that's easier to consider. And then, okay, so this is the number of offspring per parent. 2 times e to the use the total minimum of offspring per female parent. So it's different. And that's how you get the Bonkers equation. I didn't need to cite Grauer at all to come up with that. So if Dr. Dan was saying I was wrong because I didn't cite Grauer and his math was wrong, I wasn't relying on it. That's what I'm trying to prove. I mean, I began to have doubts because it's been a long time since I wrote this. But I think I vindicated myself. I didn't need his junk. And I'm going to go even farther because I'm going to connect it to some of the stuff in his papers. So all I did is I'm going to show something. So I just showed this Bonkers equation here. I'm going to, let me try to bring up a spreadsheet. I hope my computer doesn't crash when I try to do this. Oh my goodness, it'll be embarrassing. I hope it doesn't blow up. Please don't blow up. Oh yeah, Ben Rex, there's going to be some moderately, I wouldn't say the highest math I've ever done, which that's really hard. We're gonna explore some moderate level calculus to move on, because I have to tie this. So I'm grateful you're curious, and I don't know why my spreadsheet isn't coming up. I don't want it. Okay, it's coming up. It's coming up. Oh, great. Goody, goody. All right. So the nice thing is some of the math here is not, it's not that, I don't think it's that daunting. I mean, the derivation is a little bit a pain in the rear end, but to actually use it is not that hard. So we have something like e raised to the power u. It's hard to do superscripts. I apologize. So let's suppose we have u, and u equals 3, and then let's see, the e being the number e raised to the u, and then we have 2 times e raised to the u. And we could do that, and we just say exponential function And then we just multiply that by 2. All right. So if you have one birth defect on average per individual per generation, each female needs to bear like 5.4. If you have 3, each female needs to bear about 40. And that corresponds, again, let me just, if only to belabor the point, that agrees exactly with here. Each female, okay, if U equals 3, each female would need to produce 40 offspring for 2 to survive and maintain the population at constant size. And so that's how they got it. It's that simple. That's the Bonkers equation. And I kept saying, Dr. Dan, that's the Bonkers equation. I didn't, why are you saying this math is wrong? I said, it's based on the Poisson distribution. It doesn't get more fundamental than that. And he kept pressing the point, and I'm like, maybe it makes good theater for his fan club, and I do think he was sincere. He really thought I was wrong. But no, I wasn't wrong. I was telling him, Dr. Dan had agreed with Iyer, Walker, Keatley, Nachman, and Kroll, and even Muller. So let's put in another number, like 10. You get 44,052, the number of offspring per female. And if I may show this, so e to the minus 10, 99% elimination, Dr. Sanford put in 44,000, okay, minus a rounding error. And so, okay, now let's put in 25. We get 1.44 times 10 to the 11th. And what was on Dr. Sanford's slide? 10 to the 11th, okay? I think that's, you don't have to be, I mean, unless you're really anal, you have no reason to go after him. Okay, so now let's put in 80. 80. It's not going to be, okay, if I put in 80, you get 10 to the 35th. I didn't need, oh my goodness, I did not need Grauer to do any of that. That's on the calculator. I didn't use any of Grauer's stuff. You saw it right here. I went through the whole derivation. I don't know why, maybe Dr. Dan will figure out why he had that feeling, because this was done. Maybe he just missed it when I was doing this. He just assumed that I really needed Grauer to do this. This load problem, by the way, maybe he thought I just took Grauer's word and I was just building on it. We had known about this way before Grauer. We had known about this. We had known about this all the way back to Muller in 1950. This has been quietly known. It was known by Ono. That's why Ono created junk DNA. This goes all the way to the foundation. There's no need of Grauer. This is so embedded in evolutionary biology. From Muller to Ono to Kimura is there. So, and these numbers then were reflected in our Springer Nature reference work. Now, Grauer used the number 82. He hypothetically came up with 82. And I said, okay, he used that number, I'll use it too. And he came up with, let me see if I could find it. He came up, I'm a little slow here, but let me grab the reference. Grauer's, it's called Rubbish DNA. It was not officially published in the journals. I just, the reason, okay, why did I cite that? One, I'm not citing it as authoritative. I was just citing he came up with the number 82. And that's why Grauer was so mad, because he didn't like it. And the other thing is, I could just search, when I go to this paper and I want to look it up, all I do is I do a find function and I look for Bonkers. And it just takes me right there. So you saw I entered the number 1, 3, 10, 25, 80. And so Grauer uses the number 82. So if you use the number 82, what number do you get in the Bonkers equation? Well, first off, Grauer says this is the number each of us. That means one person, not female. Each male, each female needs to have this average number of kids. So this is not exactly the Bonkers equation. It's Bonkers equation divided by 2. But you could still use it, and I'll show you in the spreadsheet. So in fact, what I'll do is this here is Grauer's formulation. He's looking at only per individual. It shouldn't be that hard. So let me put 80, 82, like he said. You get 4.094 times 10 to the 35th power. But he got 5 times 10 to the 35th power. I got 4. So let's see what I have to change to make it agree with Grauer. Let's try 82. Okay, now it agrees. I mean, come on, guys. I don't think that's a material discrepancy. So yeah, thank you. At least someone in my fan club totally understands the axe I have to grind. But it's going to get a little juicier here because I'm going to show why Grauer is just taking a sledgehammer to his head. He's doing this the hard way because he's invoking evolutionary fitness. That's a can of worms. But I could still relate it. You're going to see a little bit of L'Hopital's rule for indeterminate forms to solve this. Okay, so how did he come up with 82.2? We'll get back to that. Okay. Yes, thank you. All right, so now the juicy part. This is the part where I had to labor a little harder. So we got through all of this stuff, and I'm just trying to show you where the terms came from. I don't think it's that hard. So Kimura is famous for the neutral theory of evolution, and some have viewed him as overturning parts of Darwin. I didn't make that cartoon, someone did. He's saying most evolution at the molecular level is neutral, and some people are saying, well, most evolution period is neutral, devoid of natural selection. Of course, that causes a problem. How do you get all the complexity? Because a neutral walk, should be, how can it create complexity if it's just going to be random and there's no selection, no direction, okay? And I think that's a valid criticism of neutral theory. So the neutralists kind of destroy Darwinism because they make these sort of statistical arguments. And then conversely, the Darwinists will say neutral theory won't create complexity. They kind of mutually assured destruction. Okay, so now we get into the nitty gritty. So Dr. Dan has this equation, L omega, I'll call it W. Do you really mind if I say W? I like W because it's easier to type. Technically, it's an omega. I'll call it W. That's the fitness. It's some measure of fitness. So the bigger the number, the more fit it is. Usually what we do, thank you for dropping in, Ben Rex. Enjoy your sleep. Thank you for visiting, much appreciated. So basically, if you have your reference is 1, that's kind of a good number. You make it all relative fitness relative to the best fit individual, and everyone's less than you. So everyone else has a number less than 1. And there are a variety of ways to do this. There's not, the reasons people will use different conventions. But you'll see this. You see this in his paper. Where is Grauer's paper? Let me, just to be fair to him, see if I can grab it. One moment. I'm going to grab his paper. Grauer's. I think this is a corrected paper. Let me grab it. So, and Dr. Dan said, you didn't cite his 2019 paper. You didn't cite his 2020 paper. And he was saying your math was wrong. You didn't even cite him. I'm like, well, no, I just showed. I didn't have to. I didn't have to cite that buffoon. So, it doesn't make, the insinuation, and I think he was sincere, is that my stuff must be wrong because I didn't cite him. And he said, I read your paper and you didn't cite him. Like, as if that's, I'm pointing out that's not really a bad thing. And you'll see why. So this is, again, L, and this is, he calls it the reduction in mean fitness of the population. You have this W with a bar over it. The most fit individuals, W max. And he uses the word genetic load. And he said there are many kinds of genetic loads, but this L is a genetic load. He calls it genetic load L. There you go, genetic load. So this is Grauer's version. Now let's go to Kimura. The same, by the way, this is the same paper where I got the Poisson distribution. Kimura, Maruyama, 1966. Very same paper. I basically using a different part of the paper. So let me make this bigger. And this is from Kimura's paper. So Kimura's paper is kind of, let me show you Kimura's paper. Kimura Maruyama. See if I have it. Oh yeah, this is a bear. Man, this is a bear. And you'll see, because they're so obsessed with evolutionary fitness, this has a ton of stuff in it. So first off, equation 1.4, that's the Poisson distribution right here, equation 1.4. And you could see the math is pretty nasty, okay? And this is why I'm saying you could do a lot of this without having to go through, because we're not obsessed with evolutionary fitness. And as you just scroll through this and your eyes are rolling and you're starting to get a headache, you get to this section right here. And I'm going to highlight this equation. By the way, I really respect Kimura. You could see his brilliance there. But I'm going to point out a deep flaw. Did any of this math predict we'd see, does it model the destruction of genomes through natural selection? Where is that in the math? How come this is coming as a surprise to people? How come Richard Dawkins is proclaiming his weasel program and Daniel Dennett, Darwin's dangerous idea, and you had Avita? None of that is modeled in population genetics. Where's the oversight? So as impressive as this is, you'd think, man, when you read this guy's a genius, and he was a genius, but you think he must know that evolution works. But it doesn't agree with observations and experiment. It's all imagined. A lot of it is. I wouldn't say all. It does model some things, but it doesn't model the most important things. And he really did believe that he'd figured out how things evolved, and he's totally missing the point. So the math is obviously intricate. It's powerful. I mean, some of the stuff he's borrowing from top physicists like Fokker and Planck. Okay, so you'd think, oh my goodness, evolutionary theory must be on a good footing, and that kind of all got blown away in 2017 because Zelensky's experiment, where it says genomes decay despite sustained fitness gains. So what do I mean? You see this term omega or W, that's fitness. You have maximum fitness, and then you have mean fitness. But if the notion of fitness doesn't capture the fact your genome, okay, if W is increasing, meaning fitness is increasing, and your genome's going to trash, that's not a very good metric. It's not solving anything. It's garbage. I've been saying that the last year, and I'm even more convinced it's garbage. And then you read other literature, evolutionary biologists like Lewontin, very senior, kind of saying the same thing. It's like, yeah, it is garbage. It's garbage. I came on a radio show, and I'll still defend that viewpoint. It's garbage. It's a shame though, because Kimura's math is beautiful. It's beautiful math. So I'm just pointing out, this is the paper, and you had all the Poisson distributions, and then you'll see this equation, L equals the maximum fitness, and it says here, the individuals with no mutant genes. So someone who's, is free of birth defects has the highest fitness, and that's WO or omega O. And then all the rest is, all the rest there. And you get this equation. So what does that have to do with anything? This equation in Graur's paper is found in Kimura 1966. I didn't need Graur. Again, I'm just hammering the point. I don't need Graur. I don't need that buffoon teaching me population genetics. It's right there in Kimura, the same paper I cited where I built the Bonkers equation. So how does this relate to the Bonkers equation? This is where the calculus gets in. So Graur calls this genetic load. Kimura calls this mutational load. Okay, mutational load is right here. So this is mutational load. Michael Nachman calls it genetic load. So I'm sorry, but they're just different terms for the same thing. But it's still the same. You still see the same formula. All right. L, which is the genetic load, mutational load, whatever you want to call it. But it has that same form. So, all right. So what's the difference between Graur and Kimura? Well, he uses a W max and Kimura uses a W0. But they both say that's the individual that's most fit. So it's representing the same thing with different symbols. Okay. It's not that bad. The thing that Kimura added is this term, 1 minus e to the minus 2m. That's going to be significant. You can probably guess that's going to tie to u, all right, to the symbol u. So even Graur, he could have coded this whole equation and then tied it. And I'm going to do what he didn't do. So he's calling this mutational load, and then you see something that looks kind of similar. He's also calling this genetic load, and it's 1 minus e to the minus u, whereas Kimura says 1 minus e to the minus 2m. The plot thickens. I mean, isn't this starting to look like the Poisson distribution? You didn't need all this extra math. I derived this far more simply and intuitively. You don't need all this extra stuff. I mean, look, I'm not faulting Kimura for doing all this great math, but Graur, if you're going to do this, at least try to understand what you're writing. And I could see, he blew it. Even Dr. Cardinal said Graur, people were taking him to task for making a mistake. I actually think it's more, where the mistake is still kind of, all right, I'm not going to bother trying to correct other people's messes at this point. I'm just laughing because whether he was wrong here or wrong there, everyone agrees he was wrong. But you can't say, I mean, what he was wrong about has no bearing. I mean, independent of whether he's wrong or right or this or that, you can derive the problem of genetic deterioration, at least parts of it, from Kimura's equations and basically the Poisson distribution. So I'm going to now draw the similarity. If this is genetic load and this is genetic load, U equals 2m. All right? And I'm going to try to see if I could defend that. Where does he say it? All right. All right, I'm gonna have to go to the original paper, and that was just a brief oversight on my part. Let's go to the original paper. 2M be the average number of mutant genes produced per individual per generation. Why does he use 2M instead of M? I'll explain why. So you just use U, whereas Kimura uses 2M. Why the number 2? And that's going to play a bit of an embarrassment for Guerrero, because I think he didn't quite comprehend what was going on. 2M is the average number of mutant genes produced per individual per generation, whereas instead you could just use the symbol U. Now, I actually like this. I think I'm going to screen capture, if you'll permit me, if you'll indulge me a little bit. Let me see if I could actually find, I want to find, and we'll get to L'Hopital's rule for indeterminate forms shortly, but let me see if I could find, okay, here it is. I found one piece that I wanted. So let me just insert a blank. Just one moment, please don't freeze. Thank you. And I'm just going to expand this. So you can see all the equations here. The one of interest is at the bottom right here, but that's the equation. But let's see, 2M, average number of mutant genes produced per individual per generation. Now we can actually, just to be a little bit persnickety, before we entered, okay, Kimura was doing this sometime around the time we were still discovering the structure of DNA, Watson and Crick, maybe about 10 years after. So they're still focused, gene focused rather than nucleotide focused, but you can import the math, is what I'm saying. You can import the math of when he uses the word gene, substitute nucleotides. The math is very much the same, not quite, but it's good enough for our purposes. All right, so again, there it is. 2M, average number of mutant genes produced per individual per generation. And then continuing on, U is the number of birth defects per individual per generation. Therefore, 2M equals U. Anyone can now inspect that. So I've established that is U. And then now let's do some L'Hopital's rule for indeterminate forms. So we definitely have this, that's from Dan Grauer. And this is the more complete equation by Kimura. So Kimura had this part, which is the same as Grauer's, just different symbols, but he added this part. That's important. So W max is the same thing as W0. So conventionally, we can just set that equal to 1. It's going to be our reference number. The best gets the number 1. Everyone else is less than 1, okay? Mu is, he uses the word deleterious. I'm going to just drop the subscript. So let's just say mu is the mutation rate. And there's going to be a subtle, I have to emphasize, there is a difference between, so Ira Walker-Keatley uses the word diploid mutation rate. Diploid mutation rate is twice the haploid mutation rate. So to get the diploid mutation rate, you need 2 times mu if mu means the haploid mutation rate. And half the doggone time, no one's specifying. Okay, that's mutation rate per nucleotide. Mutation rate per nucleotide. So it's different when you're saying mutant per individual per generation. But if you're saying mutation rate per nucleotide, it really would help if you said mutation rate per nucleotide haploid or diploid. Okay, so let me explain this. Yeah, that's pretty bad. Let me see if I can. All right, I'm going to cite this. I just Googled this. 2 alleles per gene diploid. A diploid organism has 2 alleles per gene. So we often say gene locus, the location. So when you have mother and father, you have a gene, you have one allele contributing from your dad, one contributing for your mom, what they call the autosomal chromosomes. It's different for the sex chromosomes, but for most of your genome, you have two alleles. Okay, I'm using their language from that AI generated thing. They're two. You have two alleles per gene locus. A locus is just the address, the place. Okay, so for two alleles per gene locus, you can extend that. So for a nucleotide site within a gene, you have two possible nucleotides that contribute to the allele. So when you say mutation, okay, it's entirely possible a gene gets two mutations because one on one allele, one on the other. And so now, if you're saying, are you talking about the diploid mutation rate, that is, per pair of nucleotides in an autosomal chromosome, and that's kind of problematic because what do you do about the sex chromosomes? Or are you just talking about the haploid version? It's easier to do the haploid. It's easier to do the haploid. So sometimes when you see 2M being the number of mutations per individual per generation, it probably is multiplying the haploid mutation rate to make it a diploid mutation rate. And you'll see that terminology in Eyre-Walker-Keatley. Greetings, Redeemed Sauce. You can always watch it. I think you missed some good stuff. We had a lot of fun. So let me see if I have Eyre-Walker-Keatley. Here it is, the rate per diploid. You see the word diploid, rate per diploid. So there's a diploid and then a haploid mutation rate. And you better know which one you're using. And I think it looks to me, Grauer is having some problem figuring that out. Why do you use two? I'm kind of, Kimura used 2M. Nachman, Kroll, and Keatley just used a single variable, U. That's easier. Use the diploid. Kimura is multiplying the haploid mutation rate per individual per generation by 2. I mean, you can still get the same result, but that's where I think the 2 comes from, because I've had to use it to translate Mueller to Nachman, Kroll, Eyre-Walker-Keatley. The literature is a little, depending on which author you're working with and what his specialty was, he might, mu may mean one thing to him and something to someone else. It has to be specified somewhere. At least thankfully here, for Eyre-Walker and Keatley, 1999, it's saying this is a diploid mutation rate. So you don't have to say 2U. You just say U. All right. Now, if you're Kimura, he would say 2M. Whereas Eyre-Walker-Keatley just says U. All right. This is, and this is where it's really embarrassing for Grauer. Because he got dinged for missing a factor of 2. And I don't know that his detractors really set him right. I still don't know, because he's using funny units. He could have just said, okay, this is the number of, he could have used Eyre-Walker-Keatley units and said, look, this is the number of, this is the number of birth defects per individual per generation. That would have settled it. It's the diploid number. But Grauer was just not being very clear. All right, so just wanted to point that out, okay? So now let's get down to okay, this is now starting to be where I wanted to go. And redeem sauce, now it's going to get into the nerd territory. This is the part that's a little bit anal, but thankfully it won't last very long. So we have Garar here, and then we have Kimura with this equation. I'm just saying here, let mu equal mu deleterious. And it's still not clear what I would say this is the haploid rate. I'm just gonna, this is, and I'll justify that. So I'll say this is the haploid mutation rate. Whatever Graer meant, I'm going to just say I'm disregarding it because Kimura will take priority. Okay, Kimura is going to take priority here. So we just let, W max is the same thing as W naught. W max in Graer's terminology is the same as W naught, W zero in Kimura's terminology. And we're going to set both equal to 1. That's, we call that normalization. That's done a lot in physics and other fields. And this is the haploid mutation rate, mu. Now, if you work through the math, if you set this to 1 and then set that to 1, you're dividing by 1. So it's just going to be 1 minus this omega W. And that's all this is. So if we set this to 1, L becomes 1 minus this. Okay. This implies omega W is 1 minus 2 mu to the n. So where did I get that? I skipped a step. Let me go to Graer's paper. Let's see, where are you? Is this his correction? Okay, this is the one before it got corrected, and he's giving notice of a correction, and I'm going to open the link to the correction. I actually don't know how that all works. So you're going to see this formula, omega equals 1, 2 mu deleterious to the n. It's not specified whether this is haploid or diploid. And it's going to be really bad if you mess this up. So he said, in equation 3, the author inadvertently omitted a 2. The correct equation is as below. So the first time he might have actually gotten it right until people came back and hammered him, or vice versa, he really did get it wrong and then people corrected him. But I'm going to argue it's still ambiguous, and at this point I don't care. I don't need him. I don't care. Dr. Dan was criticizing me because I didn't cite it, and I was like, look, there's no point in me citing this. He got it wrong once. He may have gotten it wrong twice. I'm going to much better authorities. And so I just have to reject his criticism that I wasn't citing Graer because I didn't need him. And in light of the fact he blew it once, why should I reference him? And I'm gonna show you some numbers that look kind of like, I don't know if they really resolved this. So he says here, he has this equation. Let me see if I happen to have a screenshot of that, if you'll indulge me. I don't have it. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to screenshot this and then put it in my slide presentation, because I might have to go through this again, for another presentation. So let me just, if you'll indulge me, I'm gonna just extract this out here. This is delicious. I mean, after I read this, I said, yeah. He just reinforced my view. The guy's a buffoon. I mean, I'm not even a population geneticist, and I could see some of this stuff. Okay, so I'm going to just insert this into my slideshow. And I should have inserted it. I'll insert it here, guys. I thank you for bearing with me, because this is a little bit of me just doing editing work on the fly. But this does mean a lot to me, since I went through so much trouble to dig this up. And so, what did I name this? GR2 mu. Here it is. Okay, so this is from his 2019 paper. Let me just insert Grauer and I put that, I don't know and I don't care, and I hope I've justified the reason why I don't have to weigh in on this. It's just funny. He's at least wrong once. Okay, I will just say that. He was at least wrong once, possibly twice. Let me just, and I don't need him. So, okay, so if I take this equation here, this omega with the bar over it, it's minus 2 times 1 minus 2 times mu. And I really hate having to put this bar and then this del underneath, and then it's raised to the nth power. He got that from Kimura. You'll see that in Kimura's equations. Okay, I'm just going to peruse Kimura's paper and let's see if we find it. If we find that anywhere. Kimura's paper. Oh man, his math is beautiful and it's a headache, and it's beautiful and it's a headache. It may be here. I thought I saw it here somewhere where he does that. But if I don't find it, okay, I'm not going to waste the viewer's time while I try to dig this up. I'm pretty, I don't think Grauer got that in, in a vacuum. He got it from somewhere, from someone else. I would have sworn when I was reading the paper, I'd seen it. Okay, so I do apologize to the viewer. So let me go back to the slideshow. Any case, now some calculus. This should equal e to the 2 mu times n. All right, it says here, see the next slide. So prove that 1 minus 2 to the mu n equals 2 equals e to the 2 mu n. And first you note that 2 times mu is equal to 2 times mu times n divided by n, because n over n is 1. I'm just pointing that out. That's just simple algebraic manipulation. And let me shrink this a little bit so you can see it. There is a known identity here that as n goes to infinity, or n becomes very large, it starts to approach e to the, this formula on the left side becomes this on the right side. So that's e to the minus x. So you could see here, I'm going to just show that the left side is equal to the right side for large n, really for infinite n, but it will approach it. My notation was a little sloppy here, but this is an identity. You can look it up. Just Google 1 minus x in exponential. It'll give you that formula. My instinct was just do that. So if you let x equal 2 times mu times n, then as n goes to infinity, as n goes to infinity, this on the left side becomes this on the right side, which is what we wanted to prove. The mean fitness is e to the 2 minus mu times n. Again, I'm pretty sure this is the haploid mutation rate. Now, frankly, okay, you might say, well, Sal, don't you want to be persnickety about this? Look, All you have to do is, however you do this, come up with a value for U, and then everything is okay. However you want to call haploid, diploid, just come up with a value for U, the number of birth defects average number of birth defects per individual per generation. Just get that bottom line number, come up with it, 1, 2, 3, whatever you want. All right. And make it, as Ira Walker Keatley said, make it the diploid number. It's going to be easier. The math is just cleaner. So, you might be alarmed that I'm not caring. It's like, okay, if I were trying to actually calculate what U would be, I would start to care. But I'm just saying this is what I think this means. Someone else can weigh in and say, oh, no, Sal, that's not what it means. It's like, okay, that's fine. Just give me what U is, all right? Because the Bonkers equation is driven by U. I mean, the letter U. So let's continue on. So that was L'Hopital's rule of indeterminate forms. You could solve this. This also implies that 2 mu n equals 2m. Okay, this is Kimura's, and then that 2 mu n equals U. So mu is, I'm saying it's the haploid mutation rate. N is the number of nucleotides total, not the number of nucleotide sites in a diploid organism. Again, there's this subtlety that I was trying to point out here, and it doesn't work so well with non-autosomal chromosomes. So this is why I kind of like this approach. 2 mu, where mu is haploid, times n, which is the total number of nucleotides, and then you get U. But let's see what Grauer did. So Grauer said, I made a mistake. I need to put an N. He says the total number of nucleotides, and this is from his paper, is 6.114 gigabases. I didn't see in the paper where he said what N is equal to. He just mentioned that the human genome has 6.114 gigabases, or is N the approximate number of autosomal nucleotide sites? So N would be approximately 3.057. Now it gets problematic with the sex chromosomes. So which N are you going to use? And you can see why this would be a problem. Because if you start using 2N, 2 mu N, when you should just be using mu N, you're going to make things bigger than they should be. So let me just see if I even work through the math. See if I did that. Okay. So let's say mu is 2.5 times 10 to the minus 8th is your mutation rate. And you're not even specifying whether it's haploid or diploid. But just say, I'm going to just throw that mutation rate in there. And I'm going to do it with 3.057. It should be gigabases. In one case, if you do it that way, you get only 76.4 mutants per individual per generation, and that's equal to U. So U equals 76.4. Did I do that right, guys? Why does that look? Let me put that in my spreadsheet calculator. I feel bad about that. So let's see. Mu equals 2.5 e to the minus 8th. And N was what? 3.057 e to the 9th. Oops, sorry, guys. What was that? Size genome. And so we multiply. That looked a little funny. So multiply that times that. You get 76.425. Now, if I double the size of the genome, and that's easily done, 2 times that. Oops. I get 152.85. So I'm sorry about that, guys. Somehow my math just went funny. Oh, I see what I did. Okay, now you only get 76.4. Let me make this bigger. Let me make this bigger. You only get 76.4. Now, if you use 3.3 gigabases, you get 82.5. So let's use 3.3. Okay, so 3.3 e to the 9th. You get 82.5. Now, remember his paper, his unpublished paper in here, he said 82 deleterious mutations. So what friggin' number are you using to calculate 82? I don't care, just get it right. I would argue, not that I really want to weigh in this, but if that is the haploid mutation rate, which is, I think, easier to calculate because you're not complicated with having to distinguish autosomal versus sex chromosomes, just let that be the haploid mutation rate. And then you come up with, you just take the size of the genome, which should be the, what do you call it? Okay, let's say, I'll call this the haploid size. And you get 82. This is U. Diploid size. So we just multiply that by 2. And multiply that times the mutation, the haploid mutation rate. You get 165. Okay. Now U equals 165 is a gargantuan number. Oh my goodness, it's gargantuan. So what numbers is Gar using in his corrected paper? The only reason I'd care would be just to laugh at him at this point, because, you know, he doesn't show, I didn't see any sample calculations. And why isn't he stating stuff in terms of U? That's going to be so much easier. Iyer, Walker, Keatley, Notman, Kroll. That's very easy to just state things in terms of U. However you came up with it, just state it and people can contest it. But trying to, you know, what I'm saying is, why are you putting all those things, embedding it in this complex equation? It's just, okay, I probably had as much math as he does. You try to decouple all the parts when you're doing a complex equation so you could see where something is failing. See, it's kind of nice if you just have the Bonkers equation and then you have U, because then you can just argue over whether you're getting U correct. The way he framed his equation, it's all convolved together and it becomes hard to diagnose if there is a problem. It's not, you know, I'm having a hard time figuring out how he came up with his 82 number in his other paper. So that being said, let's humor this a little bit. What he does is he goes even further and he says, okay, what's, you know, let's say it's 80% functional. So he's going to put an adjustment factor. I'm going to say percent functional. Let me do that. Percent functional. So you just need to scale it. So let's say 80%. 80%. So then that's going to change what U is. So you get 66 in one case and then 132 in another. Now let's look at his corrected paper and see what numbers he came up with. And then we're going to wrap it up. I mean, you know, they'll say I'm not treating his paper fairly. It's like, well, okay, he got called out by his colleagues for being wrong. I don't know if the correction was really a needed correction or not. And I don't care because I don't use his stuff, except his hypotheticals, which are hypothetical. However he came up with the number 82, I'll use it. I mean, just for an example. I mean, isn't it kind of moot? If everyone's agreeing that the mutation per individual per generation is already at least 10. The only argument is whether it's functional or not. And if it's functional, that's bad. Evolution's done. Because if ENCODE is only 1/10%, is only 10% right, evolution's still false. He said if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. Well, if ENCODE is only 10% right, then evolution's wrong. I mean, does it really matter? In fact, how about 5%? In fact, we're already at the limit at about 2% of functionality. Oh no, I had to bring it down to about 1 or 2%. So if it seems I'm rather cavalier and like I'm unconcerned about whether, a female has to bear 10 to the 35th power, or 10 to the 53rd, I mean, at some point, does it really matter? Then, I'll let the guys argue it out, because at this point, no one absolutely knows how many birth defects per individual per generation there is. Maybe at this point, it's not, worth investing time to figure out if Dr. Grauer knows what he's talking about. So anyway, with that being said, let's just look at his correction. So he uses now a mutation rate of, if you read the paper, you'll see him switching between a mutation rate of 2.5 to 10 to the minus 8, and then he'll come up with some rationalizations that, we could lower it down to 1.0 times 10 to the 8 based, I think, on my sense mutations, which is like, dude, that only applies to protein coding regions. To say there's my sense in non-coding regions is nonsense. And if 98% of the human genome is not coding, why are you making this correction factor based on my sense? Maybe I misread it. I just don't care. I've proven my point. I didn't need his junk. And he's not done anything to inspire me to want to use him as an authority or a reference, except to lampoon him. Okay, that might sound harsh, but that's true. That's how I feel about Grauer. And at this point, he's not exactly welcome in the scientific community. The hundreds of people, maybe thousands, that are doing research on what he calls junk. And he labeled them as ignoramuses, crooks, and all sorts of things. So he's not exactly welcomed by the rest of the community at this point. He's burned some bridges. So let's look at this. Let me see if I can let me see if I can make this a little smaller so you can see the table. And I'm sorry that this is so tiny and you have to read this table. Okay, so again, we don't know this is mu haploid or mu diploid. So let's say a mutation rate of 1.0 times 10 to the minus 8. So I'm just going to copy my spreadsheet here and see what numbers we come up with. So his mu is 1 times 10 to the 8th minus 8th. I'm assuming he's going to use the diploid genome size. And that would be 3.057 e to the 9. So here we get the 6.114. So let me just clean that up a little bit and make that a scientific notation, just so it looks nicer. Okay, 6.114. All right. And so if we multiply, see if I can get this right. We multiply that mu times that, and we multiply it by 80%. We get 48.92. I'm doing this on the fly, so I could totally botch this. So I'm sorry, this is so hard to do on the fly here. So 80%, and this isn't rendering so nicely on my screen. 1 times 10 to the minus 8th at 80%, and he's going to get 4.9 times 10 to the 42. There's something I did wrong here. Ah, yes. Because what Grauer does is he goes, oh, I know. I'm going to explain it. Hang on. Shifts entire row. Let me make this 2 mu. 2 times mu. And mu. So mu is this number. 2 times mu is that number. Let's see, plus that times 2. So we multiply, and I'm sorry, I should convert this to scientific notation. So scientific. All right, so we multiply that times that, because he said that was missing to begin with. But what if he's using this number, and he's going 2 mu, and he gets 122. So you get 97 from u. Okay, so I think I'm going to highlight this. I think this is Grauer's calculation right here. And let me just paint it. So what will be exp of u? Remember, exp of u is, this is e to the u power. Another way to symbolize it, exp of u. So let's just do it. exp of u. 3.05 times 10 to the 42. Now, what number did he come up with? He got 4.9 times 10 to the 42nd. Okay, yes. Greetings. So I was in that ballpark. 10 to the 42nd power. That's how I can't account for the slight discrepancy. Is he, I don't know what number, that's close enough. Now I'll point out what happens if I move that number to 100%. It's saying here I should get something to the 53rd power. And what do I get? I get something to the 53rd power. So I showed how again, all I'm doing is that spreadsheet. He's going through a lot of, look at how this table is written. You could have made it a lot easier. All you have to do is say, look, here are all the values of u, and that's it. And just give a table. And it'd be so much easier to figure that out. This is so convoluted, it's hard to, you could see me trying to type it. So, yeah. So a Godzilla freak sees what I'm seeing. Okay, now I'm going to give my thoughts. And this is where I'll say, if anyone critiques me, it's like, yeah, Sal, you're wrong. It's like, I'm fine because I don't care. Obviously, Dr. Grauer got it wrong to begin with, or possibly his colleagues said they're wrong. And now Dr. Cardinal says, well, everyone agrees that the correction's correct. So, all right. So at the very least, Grauer got it wrong once. What would be a really bad situation is if the correction's even worse. Because everyone's saying it's right. And like, guys, you didn't even have to go that far. You could have just made this simple, just like I showed, just like Ira Walker Keatley and Nachman and Kroll. You didn't have to do all this nonsense. And here's the killer, guys. Here is the killer. Why go through all this mean fitness and all this stuff? Because it's meaningless. Why do I say it's meaningless? Because of Lenski's experiment. I mean, this is painful, guys. I mean, if I were an evolutionary biologist, I'd be like, oh man, this is bad news. We have here this title of a paper, and Richard Lenski's an author. The lead author is Cauchy or whatever. No disrespect to Mr. Cauchy or Mrs. Cauchy. Alejandro Cauchy. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. But Lenski's kind of burying his name, or he doesn't want to be seen. It's like, are you embarrassed with the title? And it's even funnier on the official website. You don't even see that he's an author unless you click, list all the other authors. He's just kind of buried there where you can't see him. But I looked, and there he was, and I was laughing. I mean, yeah, you got to be kind of like insane to actually look at the names of each author. And I did. And I found Lenski. And I was thinking, Lenski, do you realize you've just invalidated all that investment into the Evita program, saying Darwinism builds complexity so easily? And that's just a fantasy. And yet he's advertising this as a solution, to the problem of whether Darwinism will actually work and build complexity. So he made the simulation, which is totally bogus because it doesn't agree with his own experiments. Evita didn't predict this disaster. Genomes decay despite sustained fitness gains. So what is fitness? That omega W, or that W, that omega, with the bar over it, or W. The same idea. You can call it mean fitness or just absolute fitness, whatever fitness. You want to call it capital W, capital omega or something. It doesn't matter, because evolutionary fitness, that W is increasing while the genome's deteriorating. What we see here with this situation, the way it's modeled with putting fitness in all of this, is that as fitness goes down, the implication was when fitness goes down, so does complexity. But now we have a situation where fitness is going up and complexity is going down. Where in population genetic literature is that modeled? Where is this modeled mathematically? And I'd say like nowhere. And why aren't those mathematical models saying, we're the people that modeled it mathematically. How come they're not being cited? This vindicates this model of genetic deterioration while there's a increase in reproductive efficiency. Where is all that? Where is all that in Kimura's work? God rest his soul. I hope he made it. I don't know if he is a Christian or not, but for all that wonderful, that fabulous, brilliant mind, it totally missed one of the most important things. It missed predicting the experimental outcomes we're seeing today. I'm seeing now papers that say selection-driven gene loss by natural selection, evolution by gene loss, adaptability driven by gene loss, reduction is the dominant mode of evolution. And then it's easy to forget, Michael Behe was one of the first to call this out, the first rule of adaptive evolution. And that that resulted in Darwin Devolves. That was his article in the Biology Quarterly. Now, people didn't jump on the bandwagon for a number of reasons, obviously, because he's an intelligent design proponent. And plus, him summarizing those experimental findings was not good for the evolutionary enterprise, because it said like, oh, gee, this is really problematic. All our actual careful experiments and observations show that the tendency toward improving reproductive efficiency, aka fitness, results in genetic deterioration. So why then, this is what I'm saying, why do you have all this complication in that? From a mathematical standpoint, Kimura's paper with Maruyama, from a mathematician say, hey, if that weren't connected to anything real, it'd still be beautiful. And I totally agree, because mathematicians sort of like things that, don't model reality. They find the math more pure that way. But that being said, if you're interested in the evolution of complexity, Origin of Species, Chapter 6, the organs of extreme perfection and complication, Darwin said natural selection will build it. Experiments say no, it won't. No, it won't. And where was it in all of that of Kimura's beautiful math? There's no prediction of that. And I've argued that omega term, that W term, you don't need it. And I said in that exchange with Dr. Dan, I told him, I said, you don't need fitness in that. It works when you're just losing functionality. The way that it was formulated, just straight from the Poisson distribution, kind of eliminates all the evolutionary nonsense that's piled on it. Do you see all that complication that Kimura had? It just boils down to that simple Poisson distribution, the Bonkers equations. Very simple. But he had to go through all that with L'Hopital's rule of indeterminate forms. And you don't need that. You only need that because you had the silliness of the evolutionary definition of fitness. It becomes much more elegant, simple, and actually more accurate, in my opinion, if you just dump evolutionary fitness. The math is cleaner, it's clearer, and it agrees with experiment and observation. It can be modified to agree with experiment and observation. So, I mean, they're just like taking a sledgehammer and doing this, I mean, if you like complicated math, then yeah, go for it. But don't represent it as something that represents physical reality, because it's not. So, reminds me of the quote from Barfield, as though because it is something we can do with ourselves in the water, drowning should be included as one of the different ways of swimming. You can't use word tricks and define concepts of fitness to turn randomness into design. Exactly. They have tried to. See, they have all these things where our experiments showed that a great increase in fitness, and they're just, Lenski was saying, oh, there's been an increase in fitness. He's drawing all these graphs. And I was talking to Dr. Sanford. I said, John, he insists I call him John, by the way. I said, did you know there was this book called Survival of the Sickest? And he laughed, because you know what it meant. There's such a scarcity of true innovation that they had to cite for fitness increase. They had to cite loss of function. And hence you had a New York Times bestseller called Survival of the Sickest. And this was about 10 years ago. And he was laughing, and I was too. I said, what do you think about that? And then now we had the work by Lenski. So, I'm not trying to be too cavalier about all of this. One, it's not relevant whatever Grauer is doing at this point, because he's at least wrong once. But what would be really funny is if the correction made it worse. I don't know. I'm just throwing it on the table to really anyone who wants to investigate. And I know you're out there, Schnoil. You're the kind of guy who might just want to really dig into this and find out if Grauer had it right the first time. So to that end, let me just revisit this one more time. If you're using, let me see how this, yes. If you're using the entire genome, you use the haploid rate. You don't multiply by 2. If you're considering the genome in terms of diploids, where you can have 2 alleles per gene, then you use the diploid rate. You multiply the haploid rate by 2. It looked to me that the experiments they were doing in terms of mutations per nucleotide, that was the haploid rate. What he did was take the genome size of 6.114, the whole genome, treat it like you're going to use the diploid rate on all that, and you just double all the numbers. So either look, I mean, does it really matter at this point if it's 10 to the 35th power versus 10 to the 53rd number of kids that a poor female has to bear for evolution to work? But it's still kind of funny that all his supporters that everyone agrees on, it's like, I didn't see a lot of explanation going historically. Why did Kimura use 2m and why are you using 2 mu? Where did that 2 mu come from? There should have been a discussion. We're multiplying it because we're going to go with the diploid genome, which would be about 3.3 gigabases, where in his case 3.057, give or take a little bit because of the sex chromosomes. Why wasn't there a discussion? We're using 2 mu because we're using the diploid. We're going for a diploid model of the genome rather than 2 haploids. I think doing 2 haploids will be easier. You just take the haploid mutation rate, multiply it by the haploid genome model. So that in his case it'd be 6.114 times gigabases. I like 6.6. Does it really matter at this point? And do it there. So you would just say 1 minus mu. Let me see. Let me get this formula right. I'm going to botch it, and then we'll wrap it up. I've had too much fun with this. Yeah. So instead of 2 mu, I would just make it mu. And if you think so mu n will then give you the number of birth defects per individual per generation. That's where you really want to. So the argument is, how are you arriving at the number of mutations? Birth defects per individual per generation. And I've argued that, this is where it's at. We're trying to figure out, I'm saying 2 mu n is u if mu is the haploid mutation rate, and n is the haploid model of the genome. Very easy. You don't even need 2. But if you're going to use a diploid mutation rate, if you're going to use the haploid mutation rate on a diploid model, then you have to multiply by 2. It starts to get messy. And so I'm kind of laughing. Did the correction really correct anything, or did it make it worse? So it's really funny. Okay, so at least the base scenario is Gar was totally wrong. The worst scenario is he didn't need to make a correction. Someone made it worse for him, and he thought they were right, and they were wrong. But I don't care. The Springer Nature, what started this whole thing was the Springer Nature reference work was put into question because I did cite Grauer. I think I beat a dead horse that I didn't need it and I wouldn't want it. I didn't need it and wouldn't want it. So guys, it has been totally inspiring to just hang out with you. I feel like I vindicated myself. There's been a cloud. Dr. Dan is, he's very probing and he can make you doubt yourself. And that's okay. It's part of the scientific process. He'll ask probing questions. He's just like a peer reviewer of my work. He made me go back and dig. And it was a little bit of a pain last night to be reading Kimura's work. You saw the math. It wasn't a cakewalk. But I found the stuff. So haven't there been many others who did the calculations independently? No. I'm fine. They're brilliant guys, but I don't think so. I don't think so. I will share this because I've been around some ID guys who are really good mathematicians. They don't think highly of population genetic literature. Okay, it's decent math. You could see Kimura. I think Kimura stands out as some of the most sophisticated. Definitely some of the most sophisticated Kimura stuff. But guys, look, I studied general relativity. Oh my goodness. All right, I've seen math. I've seen statistical mechanics and the Liouville theorem, and my head, I mean, my head was aching for days. This was classical, you'd think classical Newtonian mechanics, but these Hamiltonians and Lagrangians and some of the stuff that they're doing, oh my goodness, it was so hard. I'm still traumatized by it. There's, not to mention electromagnetic theory. There's like, is there anything in physics that was not hard? It's like, no, there wasn't. So yeah, I respect Kimura's math. I respect Lewontin's math. I mean, these, great Haldane, brilliant mind. But I mean, let's be frank. In science's pecking order, that's kind of low when you compare to the guys who are doing, quantum electrodynamics. I'm like, oh my goodness, it just, I haven't even studied that, and I'm having a hard enough time with classical electromagnetics. And then you move from special relativity to general relativity, and you're just bashing your heads like, oh my goodness, this is so hard. Still, at least at Johns Hopkins, at that graduate program, classical mechanics was the most devastating. I mean, it was torture. Then behind that was mathematical physics. So it really was kind of a fun break to be doing biology, but I think my brain atrophied a little bit doing biology. I don't mean to be demeaning, but I lost some of my math skills. I was really revved up doing the physics stuff. Yeah, I agree. But I don't want to be too confrontational with him. He's a friend. And I told him, I'm sorry, I have to be so disagreeable. I mean, this is kind of sad. I mean, because he's been decent to me. He's tried very hard to represent me accurately. We had, this is the first time that I got a little bit ticked, but otherwise he's done a good job. I mean, I got ticked that he was saying my math was wrong. It's like, okay, dude, that was a little bit too much. I got to fight back because it's not just me; it's my co-authors. But in the world of gambling, or betting, or hedge fund management, or even insurance, you don't estimate whether there's a threshold or not, whether an event happened or will happen. You estimate the probability. So like when you have a weather forecast, you don't get like, oh, it's going to be 100%, you rarely ever get 100% rain unless it's already raining. So you get a forecast that says 90% chance of rain, given what we know now. And that's what I was trying to frame. When I said miraculous, that means I'm about 99% sure it's miraculous. I stuttered when he was challenging me. I was dumb enough to kind of try to placate him, and I thought it was a good question. And I wanted to humor him, but then I realized, no, you're asking the wrong question. Which he should have said, first of all, well, this is how we do it in evolutionary biology when we have thresholds to make sure we're absolutely right, which is like practically non-existent anyway. And so I criticized him and I said, look, you don't hold yourself to the same standard. What thresholds do you have that you're right? And I could cite numerous papers where the researchers themselves says, one, we will never know. We will never know, and we'll never have proof. And I was just laughing. That was for eukaryotic evolution. And I said, how does that count as a scientific theory? You're going to criticize me for not having a threshold, and people on your side are putting forward theories that they have admitted they can't prove and that they'll never know. So, I mean, why are you being so hard on me and not criticizing your own side? But that being said, I'll say, look, when the odds start to get like, 1 out of 10 to the 50th power, I'm just like, look, I wouldn't wager my soul on that, okay? I wouldn't wager, what are the chances that theory is right? If it's 1 out of 10 to the 40th or 10 to the 30th, it's like, I wouldn't feel comfortable. So that's how I feel. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I like Dr. Dan. I'm sorry to have so much backlash today, but he was criticizing my math and saying my math was wrong. I'm just like, no, it wasn't. I think I emphatically showed my math was not wrong, and it wasn't wrong, and I didn't have to cite Guerauer at all. And I think I made the case it's probably better I didn't. It would have made a mess. The only thing I did was I took his hypothetical number and pumped it into the Bonkers equation. You could take any number you want and just try it. We tried it here. It's not a big deal. So let me now just finish off with some closing credits. Guys, I had a ton of fun. One reason I'm going to try to do streams for a couple things. I'm going to be in a documentary that's releasing next week. The teaser and trailer have already gotten 1 million views. In fact, it occurred to me, why don't I close out with playing the teaser? The trailer and the teaser. Let me see if I can do that. I think I could do that. We'll close out with a trailer and teaser. Each of them are about 8 minutes long. Next week it's going to be released. It's already got 1 million views. It's going to have 5 million views we anticipate after it's released. Not that I ever wanted to be involved in uncovering a church scandal. I wanted to see that the Christian church was honorable and practicing and pure. And instead I find a lot of ugliness, like people had found with Ravi Zacharias and any number of fallen ministers. I've gotten sick of it. I feel that Christianity is flourishing because of the scientists and the special forces in the military, and then ordinary people. It's not been the seminarians and the pastors in the pulpits with good salaries and good theater, good actors in churches built around personality cults. That has hurt Christianity a lot, and it's time for that to go. I think the stuff that we're doing here is very important for people's souls and encourage them. And let me see, William Bamfee. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm sorry if I haven't been introduced to you before, but thank you for visiting. And so I'm planning to do more of these. A psychologist said it's actually really good when you're a content creator versus a content consumer. It'll elevate your feeling about everything. It'll make you feel better about life. And so that's partly for me. But now that I'm going to be exposed, I'm getting more exposure on the internet because of this church thing. I was a plaintiff in a very expensive legal probe. There are millions of dollars spent on attorneys. Oh my goodness. I was not asking for any damages. I was asking for disclosure of financial records and contracts that had been hidden, and we found some pretty bad stuff. So I just wanted to let you know I'm not, I don't believe in suing people to try to get damages if, they're other brothers and sisters in Christ. I was holding them to their obligation, their stated obligation to disclose their finances to the congregation, how they're spending donations, and they wouldn't do that. And they spent $2 million paying high-powered Washington, D.C. attorneys, Northern Virginia attorneys, $1,000 an hour to keep us from getting down to the truth. And they fought us hard. We were able to get a little bit of disclosure, not as much as we wanted, but we've uncovered millions of dollars in questionable spending, maybe in the tens of millions. And so I'll get exposure for that. I also, 2 days after the release of that documentary, I'm going to be interviewed again on Denver KLTT radio for 2 shows. One on medical doctors, intelligent design, and the work of Robert Matheny, who's destroyed the embryonic stem cell industry. Not quite single-handedly, but he's put a big dent in it. He's able to take, when you get cut, you're able to regrow your own cells and heal. He figured out how to extend that. So when people have damaged hearts, there are ways you can stimulate your own cells to rebuild. And it's now in FDA-approved clinical trials, which is fabulous. And he's saving lives, and he's stopping this horrific embryonic stem cell industry of crank therapies. I mean, you don't take some aborted fetus, grab some stem cells from it and just shove it randomly in a person. What do you think is going to happen? he found a better way to reprogram the epigenetic programming inside. So I'm going to talk about that. That had to be the greatest interview I ever conducted on my channels. And it was really encouraging. He's a Christian creationist. No need of Darwinism to do great things in medical bioscience. I'm going to talk about him and other medical doctors that have no use for Darwinism, and that Darwinism has been used as a litmus test to get rid of Christians. It's actually hurt science because very fine minds could actually otherwise prosper and contribute to society. But, there's been a cultural imperative to suppress believers who want to flourish in the sciences and in the medical sciences. That's starting to thaw out. Praise God for that. The second one, we'll be talking about the optimality of biology. Yes, there's much death and suffering in this world. The creationists say the world's intelligently designed, but also cursed. But when we actually look at the designs, if we were able to accept the world is cursed, there's death and suffering and pain, is there signs that there was a great mind that put it together that, before we were kicked out of Eden, things were spectacular because they're still spectacular now. So I'm going to talk about the fact physicists, secular physicists, not creationists, are realizing that biology is nano-engineered to levels we have never imagined possible. Some people are saying this, they're saying some of the stuff in biology is so well designed, we could learn from it. It's better than anything we could do. Good example, this is James Tour. He said there's chiral-induced spin selectivity in our biology. That's why you don't need a 100 megawatt generator. You can operate on half a watt, 10 watts, something like that, some small number. Otherwise, your brain would overheat and be on fire. You'd incinerate your brain trying to do all the computations the human brain does. But because of chiral-induced spin selectivity of the electrons, biology can actually control the electrons. No chemist is able to do that as well as our bodies do it. And he's saying that's really just amazing. If no chemist, no physicist can control electrons like biology, it's like, whoever put together our biology was pretty brilliant, full of wisdom and knowledge. And that sort of suggests that's God, because it's clear at this point, natural selection, Darwinian process cannot create something as spectacular as that. And I'll list all of the discoveries that physicists have been exploring. And you read it, it's just like, this is great. I want to declare the works of God. So that's my second interview. And, things are just moving along in that area. So glory and honor to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. It says to acknowledge him in all your ways. So with that said, let me cue up the real David Platt. That's the name of the oops, sorry about that. That is the name of documentary, Real David Platt. And you'll see me in this documentary. I'm happy to say, oh, maybe it's the real David Platt. Oh, we're good to go. Okay, you're going to see me in here. I want to thank Lieutenant Commander Sandy Pigeon and his wife for donating to my wardrobe for this show. They're very, very generous. And Mrs. Pigeon just has the most excellent taste in clothing. I can't take credit for the way I looked in terms of the clothing. So I want to acknowledge them for helping, try to present me to the world as best as possible. Okay, so guys, I'm just going to close out with that. Glory and honor to our Lord and Savior, to all the brethren who love our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. God bless you.